Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Naked Truth. Trisha Hershberger here, in the buff to be as raw and open as possible. And this is a very, very special Naked Truth because I have Reina Scully on as my guest.
What's up? I'm naked too. It's cold and it's a lot more flesh than I expected.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like you know that you're not showing anything, but at the same time you're like, oh, I'm kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, what do I do? Accidents.
It's really awesome when you're mid-sentence and like a cold drop of water drops like right onto your leg or on your back or something while you're talking, and you're like, oh, and
Surprise! Oh, I love it.
yay! Well, I love that you're here. Thank you so much for being here and getting naked for me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It is absolutely my pleasure. I'm excited.
Awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead and thank those of you who sent in your own Naked Truth vlogs last week. That's Jake, Christopher, Nathan, Pat, Hiram, Aaron, Kenny, Prescott, and Kristen, Julia, Chris, and Tom. You guys rock my socks. Thank you so much. And this week I have Reina on because Jose Can You See wrote in and said, a naked truth on different cultures would be fun, maybe with Reina, comparing Japan to the U.S., elements she brought over with her, and it would be interesting to see her talk about adjusting to life here too. So, Reina, first of all, tell everyone at what age you moved from Japan to the U.S.
Let's see. I moved when I was 3 because of my dad's job. And so, as much as it seems like I should be very, very Americanized, I went home to visit Japan like twice a year consecutively until I was in high school. So, still very, very traditionally Japanese. It's very mixed.
Yeah, I think if you moved over at 3, like, you would have lost the language or the culture. Do you think that going home twice a year is what kept it for you, or did your parents always speak Japanese at home, or?
It's definitely a combination of both. My parents definitely spoke mostly Japanese in the household, and I went to Japanese school because they didn't want me to lose my Japanese, so that was a big factor too. But physically actually going to Japan is probably the biggest deal because that is, it all, as much as I'm saying that it was helpful and useful, and it obviously made me who I am today, it was very confusing as a kid because you have to behave differently, and I feel like I didn't really catch on to that very well when I was making a fool of myself in Japan, and then I'd come back here and I'd have like an accent when I came back. But yeah, definitely going there was the more influential part, I'd say. Twice a year, that's a lot, if you think about it.
And how long would you go back for when you went back?
Ooh, during the summer, I would stay for the whole summer vacation duration, so like a solid, like, 1.5 to 2 months.
Holy crap!
I know, like, I feel like I really did grow up with, like, my cousin, for example, who's only a year older than me. She was always a big influence, and actually, I call her, like, big sister in Japanese. That's actually really weird. I was convinced she was my older sister, and they didn't think to correct me, so I was very confused again when I was in middle school, and I realized she was just my cousin. But, yeah, that was... I don't know, everything was always a culture shock. Like, even going there was a culture shock, coming back was a culture shock, and in the winter, I think I'd only go for a couple weeks or so, but even still, the environment is so different, and even, like, the weather is different. It's basically just, like, an extreme version of what we used to get on the East Coast. Like, the winters are super crazy cold, and the summers are insanely hot. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, as like I said before, as great as it was, it kind of probably gave me, like, a little bit of an identity crisis, because it's like, who am I? Where do I belong?
Yeah, now this comment was left on a video I did on moving to LA, and I kind of felt like the comment was kind of like, okay, it's great to hear about moving cross country, that's very helpful, but what would it be like to move to another country? And being here on YouTube, we've got viewers from all over the world. So yeah. What would you say to people who are maybe thinking about moving to the US? Is there anything that like sticks out for you when you talk about that kind of culture shock?
Oh, that people that are moving to the U.S.? I would say the U.S. really is a country of freedom, and I think the U.S. that your individuality is what's very important, and it's totally okay to be unique. For example, like Japan is my only comparison, obviously, but Japan's a really tiny country, so it's very unified, and it's very obvious when you're different or when you're like behaving differently. So it's easy to like ostracize people like that. And it's very important that you kind of behave like everyone else and be unified among them. Whereas here, it's celebrated that you're different and unique and you have your own ideas and your own like concepts, or maybe you're like an artist. And I think that is the biggest like important thing about America, to be honest with you. It really is celebrated, and I think that's really important. And I feel like maybe that isn't found that often in other countries. So I would say that was probably the biggest thing for me.
So, in your guesstimation, would you say it would be harder to move to Japan from the US than from Japan to the US?
I feel like, see, it's so weird because I had this trouble explaining to Mike, who visited Japan for the first time with me this year. I was telling him, I'm like, okay, so Japan's really different. Like, you're going to have to behave, like, really polite and courteous, and you have to, like, always bow your head, like, a lot, and just make sure you're always, like, nodding and smiling. And I made, like, a really big deal out of it, and I probably shouldn't have. But I think in the end, he found it really easy to navigate and be in Japan because most of the signs are romanized in English. So every sign has like a little bit of an English like notation underneath. So it's not impossible to find your way around. And all of like the street signs and all of the train stations and everything's in English. So I'm starting to realize that maybe it's not so difficult to move to Japan from here. But I don't know. Okay, honestly, I think moving here is harder. I really do.
Okay.
Yeah, Japan is very aware that like English or like American English is like the universal language, so they try really hard to cater to you. Whereas if you're here, it's like a whole huge land. Everyone looks different. Like there's no like it's not even like oh everybody's white. Like that's not even the case here. So I think that is a way bigger culture shock, and I think it's really hard. It's harder to adapt to America. And you don't know.
I also wonder if it would be harder because here in America, we are not as well educated on other languages as we should be. And I feel like everyone would kind of have this attitude, I was going to say for better or worse, but definitely for worse, not for better, of like, you're in my country now, you're going to speak my language. Is that something that you would think would make it harder for people?
It definitely does. Like, you're very right. I never realized it, but I remember, like, Spanish and French were options to take in high school, but, like, that's why those are it. But, like, nowadays, Mandarin is a standard. Like, that, to me, is ever evolving in education. So the fact that there's no extra language that Americans like should be learning on the regular is very different. I don't think it's necessarily like egocentric, but maybe it is. I mean, America's a big country. I think people don't realize that. Like even when you look at the weather, this is really silly, but like the weather in Japan is unpredictable, and you just shouldn't look at the Weather Channel because it's an island. So the tiniest gust will change everything. Whereas in the U.S., like you could tell the weather from like far away because it's a big physical land and it's all like unified in one area, so you can tell what's about to happen as it approaches you. Like it's really weird. The weird things you realize when you're like introspecting. But because America's so physically big, I think it's okay that they're egocentric. I think it makes sense that that English is a language that is supposed to be universal, and I get why it's moving in that direction. And
I just always feel really bad when like someone comes up to me that speaks another language, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying. I'm so sorry.
yeah, I get that. The U.S. definitely focuses on a different angle in terms of languages, but I feel like maybe that could be the same thing in other countries too. Like, I mean, I don't know, do European schools always teach English? I guess they do. They always teach English, don't they?
I don't know. I think it's an option. I'm not positive, but I think it's an option. Like, we can choose French or Spanish. They have English as an option, but I think a lot of people do choose to learn that.
I see. I mean, I guess it would be the smartest move. If I lived in Japan, so, that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm a ding-dong, and I took Latin, which is not useful at all. Ha ha.
Oh my gosh, Trish, you don't understand. I took Latin in college, and it made me so sad. It made me realize how dumb I was. But it also made me realize that the English language is actually pretty marvelous, and that there is like perfect, beautiful structure, and what was it? Conjugating nouns? You have to conjugate nouns, right? They have like declension.
Conjugate verbs.
What is it?
I mean, you do. Nouns also have their own endings. Yeah.
Yeah, like AE. There is a song I learned in order to remember all the endings. I feel like you're the only person on earth that could appreciate that because
Oh
nobody
yeah.
knows Latin.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because nouns all have different endings depending how they're grammatically used in the sentence. So nothing helps you learn English grammar better than taking Latin.
But it's so tedious. Like, how hard was Latin? Latin was like impossible for me.
Oh, it's the Rubik's Cube of languages.
Ooh, I love it. That was really poetic. I enjoyed that a lot.
Thank you. Well, that's what I always told myself because it would take me like forever to translate a full complex Latin sentence into English. But then once I did, I felt like, yes, I'm so smart and I feel so accomplished. It felt like finishing a Rubik's Cube.
I totally understand that. I feel like Latin made me just a little bit smarter, which was the reason why I took it, so it makes sense.
There you go. All right. So you talk about moving from your personal experience when you were 3. So your parents then moved to the U.S. as adults. Do you remember them talking about any specific like challenges they had to overcome, or have they ever talked about what that was like for them?
Okay, the one thing they always talked about was the DMV. It was, I know. They thought the DMV was an absolute psychotic nightmare, and
Well, it is.
they're like, "This is hell. Like, we moved to hell. We brought our baby girl to hell." It was bad. I think the DMV was rude. Japan's a really, really polite and courteous country. Like the food and customer service is different. Everything is really pristine, and it doesn't matter if you're walking into a train station or like a convenience store. Like everybody like bows their head. They treat you like you're a god because Japan believes a lot in like different deities and stuff. So customers are considered godly. And I think the fact that it's like government run, like the DMV is a government position, and they were treated that horribly and that brutally really shocked them, and they were so traumatized. And I remember, I think my dad had a work visa, so he had to convert it into like a regular resident, permanent residency status, and he had to go to Newark, New Jersey, which I don't know if you know, but is basically an armpit hellhole.
Oh,
And,
I know Newark well. Yeah. As a kid growing up in Philly that had to take the train to New York City for auditions, I know Newark.
yeah, I knew you would. It's gross, as you know, it's gross. And that was a shock for them too. The IRS was a shock. Not the IRS. The building that had like the visa and like the Social Security stuff, that was traumatizing for them as well. I guess that's what it is. Government-run things were a shock to them. They couldn't believe that they were so like brass and shamelessly dick.
Yeah.
They're sad. But yeah, that was pretty much it for them.
Okay, so what advice would you have, being someone who has moved, what advice would you have for people who were thinking about moving to a new country?
Ooh, thinking of moving to a new country.
A new
My
country.
new crunchy. It's cold. Um,
It's cold and I'm naked and I don't know what's happening.
I'm shaking and I'm nervous and I'm sweating, but I'm cold. It's like cold sweats. Um, let's see. Well, I have a suggestion for Japan specifically.
Okay.
Japan has a fantastic English as a second language, like schooling system. And so if you go to Japan without knowing a word of Japanese, the program that you're a part of will help you teach it, and it'll provide housing, and you get to kind of, you get to be like just a part of like regular Japanese society. By little what it's like to be there and what's normal and like what's abnormal and things you should do and can't do and how to like treat children and how to speak to like adults. And I feel like they're all really good all-encompassing programs. I think actually this is really weird. When I used to intern for DeFranco, I worked with a different intern named Kelsey, and she recently just came back from teaching in Japan for a year, and she loved it. And, I mean, she was brilliant to begin with, but she was a teacher for a year, and they taught her everything. They gave her housing. And you could tell that she learned a lot of Japanese, and she really liked Japan. It made me super happy. So I feel like for whoever is interested in moving to Japan, brush up on the language a little bit, but really going, like, forcing yourself to be in the culture is what's really going to teach you. You just have to do it. There's no, like, you shouldn't really think about it too much. If you want to do it, you should just do it.
You should just do it. All right, well, Reina, thank you so much for getting naked on this show.
It was my pleasure. I feel really empowered, honestly, minus the cold sweats.
Yeah, it's kind of like freeing. I mean, yes, cold, but freeing. Awesome. Well, Reina, everyone obviously knows they can find you on SourceFed, SourceFed Nerd, twitch.tv/SourceFed. Tell us what your personal channel is.
Okay, you can find me on youtube.com/Reina Scully. All of my things are Reina Scully, so it's really easy to find me. But yes, I talk about weird Japanese shit on my channel, so yay. But it's not really shit. It's more like I talk about just Japanese words and phrases, and I teach a little bit of stuff there, so you can find me there.
Yay! Well, thank you so much. To everybody at home, my question for you guys this week is if you ever thought about moving to a new country, what are the challenges you would expect to have to overcome? And if you have moved to another country, see if you can maybe answer some of those challenges for other people in the comments section. We're all going to help each other out this week. And as always, if you want to submit a naked truth of your very own, you can do that using the About section of my channel. You can click for business inquiries only and send me a link to your YouTube video of you in the buff answering our questions and just talking about life in general. From the shoulders up only, please. No nudie, sexy time stuff. Just, yeah, just from the shoulders up. See, Reina knows.
Oh, that's so funny. I'm sorry.
And also, please continue to keep suggesting future vlog topics. You guys rock my socks. Thanks so much again, Reina, and we'll see you next week.